This is breaking news from Channel 7 Eyewitness News.
And we continue to follow breaking news. A historic day in this country. A jury in Manhattan has found former President Donald Trump guilty of all 34 felony counts for falsifying business records.
Moments after the verdict was read this afternoon, a somber Trump walking out of the courtroom and then blasted the verdict.
This was a rigged, disgraceful trial. The real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people.
And good evening to you. I'm Liz Chow.
And I'm Bill Ritter. It took 2 days, but this jury this afternoon finding Donald J. Trump guilty on 34 counts of falsifying records. The first time a former president has ever been convicted of a felony. A historic verdict that could have a major impact on the November election.
After the verdict was read, Trump left the courthouse in his motorcade. The judge has set sentencing for July 11th, less than 4 months before the November election and just days before the Republican National Convention. Just moments ago, we saw Donald Trump. This is on 5th Avenue, pumping his fists. This is in front of Trump Tower as he headed inside shortly afterwards. We are waiting right now for Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg to hold a news conference, his first since the verdict was read.
We're going to begin our coverage with Eyewitness News reporter Lauren Glassberg. She's at the courthouse in Lower Manhattan. What an afternoon, Lauren.
An afternoon that most people did not expect would happen as soon as it did. You know, certainly this is historic. Former President Donald Trump is now a felon, the first for a U.S. president. That is historic indeed. This case was brought by Alvin Bragg, as you mentioned. He charged Trump with 34 counts of falsifying documents to cover up a sex story that could have negatively impacted his presidential campaign in 2016. And a jury today found that he was guilty on all 34 counts. Now, every day during this trial, all 7 weeks, Trump has talked about this trial, saying that the judge was not impartial, saying that it has been rigged against him, and he sometimes ran afoul of the judge's gag order. Today, he spoke for the first time since being convicted. Take a listen.
This was a disgrace. This was a rigged trial by a conflicted judge who was corrupt. It's a rigged trial, a disgrace. They wouldn't give us a venue change. We were at 5% or 6% in this district, in this area. This was a rigged, disgraceful trial. But the real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people.
An indignant Trump, to be sure. Once the jurors left, Todd Blanche, Trump's attorney, argued that the verdict should be tossed because it relied on Michael Cohen's testimony. The judge immediately denied the motion. Sentencing will now be July 11th, a little more than a month from now, and there is a possibility, though it's unlikely, he could be sentenced to prison. Each count carries up to 4 years, but these are low-level felony counts, so it's unlikely he will be sentenced to prison. Prosecutors during this case submitted invoices and checks into evidence. They called on 20 witnesses. Some were former White House aides. There was a tabloid publisher. There was a porn star and Michael Cohen, Trump's former fixer. The defense only called 2 witnesses and never called on the defendant, Donald Trump. In the end, 12 New Yorkers, 12 Manhattan residents returned a verdict after about 10 hours of deliberating, convicting a former president of the United States. Just want to remind you that during the closing arguments, defense attorney Todd Blanche said he created this phrase calling Michael Cohen the GLOAT, the greatest liar of all time. Today, his own client, Donald Trump, has been convicted of falsifying documents, effectively convicted of lying. Live in Lower Manhattan, Lauren Glassberg, Channel 7 Eyewitness News.
Thank you, Lauren. Got to wonder if the former president is going to regret not having taken the witness stand. We'll find out.
Very good question. All right. Our Josh Einiger was in the courtroom when today's verdict was read. And Josh, I found it so fascinating because initially we thought that the jury had gone home for the day when we heard that the judge had announced that the jury came back with a verdict, because Donald Trump and his attorney, Todd Blanche, they seemed lighthearted. They were joking. Yep. They were laughing moments before this verdict was read.
So So Liz, it was just a wild swing in the atmosphere of that courtroom over the course of maybe 20 minutes to half an hour. At 4:15, so let me just set the stage for you. We're sitting in this courtroom for hours with nothing happening. Just about 60 reporters and a bunch of court officers quietly typing and waiting for something to happen. At around 4:15 or so, the attorneys started to show up for the people, for the district attorney's office, and then came Donald Trump and his legal team and some members of his entourage. The judge emerged and said that he was going to dismiss the jury at 4:30. That was the end of their working day. They were not out of the building. They had not been dismissed. That was what he said would happen. And then he left the bench. And for the next 20 minutes or so, there was this very light-hearted moment at the defense table. Perhaps they thought it was a good sign that there was no verdict, and Trump and his lead attorney, Todd Blanche, were joking, were guffawing at the defense table. At one point, Blanche actually put his head down. He was laughing so hard he kind of doubled over the table. And then at 4:37, so 4:30 comes and goes, and then at 4:37, the judge comes out and says that, in fact, at 4:20, the jury had sent him a note saying that they had reached a verdict, and that totally changed the mood in the courtroom. And then, things progressed from there. Bill and Liz.
Josh, since you were there, if we could debrief you a little bit about what it was like in there as the verdicts were gone, right down 1, 2, 3, all the way to 34, and what was the reaction of the people in the courtroom, and if you could see him, Mr. Trump?
So I will say that the biggest audible reaction was when the judge said there was a verdict. There was sort of a gasp in the courtroom. Everyone was surprised by that. When it was time to render the verdict, for the foreman to announce the verdict, they actually gave him a wireless microphone, like you would give a DJ at a wedding or something, and he was sort of stood up with this microphone in his hand, and then they went through the counts. On the count, count 1, how do you rule? He said guilty. Count 2, guilty. Count 3, guilty. And there was sort of silence. You heard tons of keyboards typing away as reporters like me and others who were there were typing what we were hearing. But there was no obvious reaction from any of the parties, including Donald Trump, for the first several counts. Remember, we're behind him, so we can't see his face. And the camera that is usually on was off. And so we couldn't see his face. And so he was just there, and then at count 4, he slowly starts shaking his head. And that lasts for maybe until count 6 or 7, when he stopped shaking his head and he just stood there and listened as they got to count 34, every single count guilty.
No doubt you certainly witnessed history firsthand this afternoon.
Real quick, did they poll the jury?
Yeah.
For each one?
Mm-hmm.
They did.
Yep, okay.
They polled the jury not for each count, because then we might still be in the courtroom.
You would still be in the court.
34 of them, but they did go through counts 1, juror 1 through juror 12. Is this your verdict? And they each said yes. And then they filed out of the courtroom, and the rest is history.
You were inside to history today, Josh.
Very much.
You really were. Thank you.
All right, Josh, thank you very much. NJ Burkett is also near Josh in Lower Manhattan at the courthouse. And NJ, we are expecting the DA to speak about this case. And when these charges first were announced many months ago, this was the case of all the cases that folks really did not think was going to end up in this particular way.
Yeah, well, I think that's right, Liz. Remember that this is only one of 4 criminal cases against Donald Trump. And it turned out to be the first to go to trial and the first to have a conviction. The jury was clearly feeling the weight of history, and a quick verdict, and this was a quick verdict, Liz, does very often favor the prosecution. That verdict, as Josh said, echoed through the silent courtroom. Donald Trump, America's 45th president, guilty on every count, all 34 counts in the indictment. The defense did not expect a not guilty verdict, Liz. I don't think that they thought that at all. I think they were hoping for a hung jury, 1 or 2 holdouts maybe, but no, that did not happen. The defense wanted to make it all about Michael Cohen. You know, they said Cohen is a liar. He's the MVP of liars. He is the GLOAT, the G-L-O-A-T, the greatest liar of all time. But it was more than Cohen, Liz. There were recordings of phone calls, conversations, emails, checks signed by Donald Trump. And then there was David Pecker, the former publisher of the National Enquirer, who corroborated much of what Cohen said, and that proved to be devastating. I spoke about the trial a few minutes ago with veteran criminal defense attorney Arthur Idala.
For this long trial, they didn't deliberate a long time. They must have gone in the room, and there must have been 2 or 3 people who were on the fence, and the others said, we'll prove the case to you. Put Pecker's testimony together with Cohen's testimony, and NJ, it's an acting in concert. They don't have to prove Donald Trump did everything. They just had to prove he acted in concert with these other people to commit this crime. Having lost cases myself, right now they're in a room right behind the courtroom that they were able, that was like their war room, so to speak. You probably could hear a pin drop, because as the lawyers, you feel this sense of loss, this sense of failure, and you know, all the air is taken out from your lungs. There's probably some curse words being thrown around, to be blunt about it. You know, you're really upset. These people have worked really, really hard, and overall, it's not like they were out for a week. It's not like the jury was out for a week and they say, well, it really made them think. No, they were out for hours. I think the judge's toughest decision now is going to be what the sentence is. He can't sentence him to jail. He can't sentence him to probation. This is a guy who's followed by the Secret Service. What is he going to do? Sends him to community service, go clean a park? He's going to have to find some creative community service, some way for Donald Trump to use his stature and his finances to make New York City a better place.
And now the statement from Michael Cohen, quote, "Today is an important day for accountability and the rule of law. While it has been a difficult journey for me and my family, the truth always matters. I want to thank my attorneys Dana Perry and Joshua Kolb for their invaluable guidance and support throughout this process." End quote. Again, the statement from Michael Cohen late this afternoon. And so the jury, after less than 2 days, finds Donald Trump guilty on all 34 counts in the indictment. We're live in Lower Manhattan. NJ Burkett, Channel 7 Eyewitness News.
Newt, you've covered this case the whole time. Quick question for you. You know, it couldn't have been much worse if he had gone on the witness stand, Mr. Trump, right?
Well, look, I mean, you could certainly say that because he was convicted on all counts, but I'm convinced that the defense would never have allowed that. Now, that said, under criminal procedure law, he is allowed to take the stand even over the objections of his attorney. So he could have overruled them. He could have taken the stand. He didn't do that, and I'm sure the defense does not have any regrets about that decision, Bill.
Okay, NJ Burkett has covered this trial from the beginning. Newt, thank you for that coverage. I appreciate it.
All right, NJ, thank you. Anthony Carlo is also down in Lower Manhattan. He's just a little bit further away. He's at Collect Pond Park near the courthouse. And Anthony, you've been gathering reaction from people who've been in and out and around the courthouse.
Liz, that's right. And just to put this in perspective for you, like you said, right across the street from the courthouse, this is where sort of the spectacle has been building up for the past 6 weeks. And let me tell you, today was the pinnacle of it all. I just want to paint the picture for you here and show you just some of the people obviously supporting the guilty verdict today. You see they have sort of almost pitched their sign in the ground as a victory stamp. Lock him up. Just to the left of that person there, you've got Don the felon that is just beyond a reporter there doing a live shot. So I want to take you through the moments of essentially when this verdict came down, you know, what it was like here. I mean, if you almost picture the courthouse across the street, the main attraction at a sports venue, and then all of the fans and on both sides really gathering across the street, you knew something that was going on. There was a buzz in the air. We heard a bit of a cheer, and as the former president sort of deflated inside of the courtroom when that guilty verdict came down, so did many of his supporters out here. But I want to point out something, and I've spoken with many Trump supporters out here. They were almost bracing for this to happen, and that's because the former president yesterday set the parameters for that. He said that Mother Teresa would not have even had a shot at beating these criminal charges. So these supporters were almost setting themselves up for the failure, I guess that is, of a guilty verdict here for the former president, but also really dispersing and heading right back to their position to prepare to vote for him in this upcoming election. Take a listen to some sound from both sides.
I'm surprised that, a former president got found guilty like this, but, whether he did it or not, I'm not sure. And what the charges were, totally, I don't know 100%. I am surprised, though.
Well, I'm particularly excited because, well, to me, it was very clear that he was guilty in the crimes that he committed, and that, but nonetheless, it was a complex case. And I think the jury had to wade through a lot of ambiguous evidence, some very difficult witnesses, and I think they did a great job in doing that.
I think that this thing, isn't a real case. I think that it's basically a setup, that it was, if anything, a misdemeanor crime that the statute of limitations already wore up, and they made it a felony. It just seems to me like the fix was in that they were out to get Trump.
And so you hear there from one of his supporters basically echoing what the former president has said, which is that this is a rigged case.
Anthony, we have to interrupt you. The Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg is having a news conference. We're going to go ahead and listen in to what he has to say. Apologies for interrupting you.
No worries at all. Go right ahead.
All right, you can see Alvin Bragg. He's at the podium there. It's getting settled. A couple people getting behind him. Let's go ahead and listen in to what the Manhattan DA has to say about today's historic verdict.
Good evening. First and foremost, I want to thank the jury for its service. Jurors perform a fundamental civic duty. Their service is literally the cornerstone of our judicial system. We should all be thankful for the careful attention that this jury paid to the evidence and the law and their time and commitment over these past several weeks. 12 everyday New Yorkers, and of course our alternates, heard testimony from 22 witnesses, including former and current employees of the defendant, media executives, book publishers, custodians of records, and others. They reviewed call logs, text messages, and emails. They heard recordings. They saw checks and invoices, bank statements, and calendar appointments. This type of white-collar prosecution is core to what we do at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. In the 1930s, District Attorney Thomas Dewey ushered in the era of the modern, independent professional prosecutor. For now nearly 90 years, dedicated professionals in this office have built upon that fine tradition. A major part of our practice during that nearly 90 years has been public integrity work, including cases involving jurists, local and state electeds, public servants, and others. I want to thank this phenomenal prosecution team, embodying the finest traditions of this office: professionalism, integrity, dedication, and service. They are model public servants, and I am proud and humbled to serve side by side with them. The 12 everyday jurors vowed to make a decision based on the evidence and the law, and the evidence and the law alone. Their deliberations led them to a unanimous conclusion, beyond a reasonable doubt, that the defendant, Donald J. Trump, is guilty of 34 counts of falsifying business records in the first degree to conceal a scheme to corrupt the 2016 election. And while this defendant may be unlike any other in American history, we arrived at this trial and ultimately today at this verdict in the same manner as every other case that comes through the courtroom doors, by following the facts and the law, and doing so without fear or favor. I want to conclude by expressing deep gratitude to the NYPD and the officers of the Office of Court Administration for securing the courthouse, all of our safety, making sure the courthouse and all of the other matters that are important in their own right continued seamlessly. They will continue to be and have always been incredible partners. Thank you.
And do you plan to request a prison sentence for this conviction? And do you think that Donald Trump's multiple violations of the gag order that was in place should factor into that request at all?
The judge scheduled a sentencing for July 11th. We will speak in court in that time. He also set a motion schedule. We will speak in our court filings as we've done throughout this proceeding.
Donald Trump has repeatedly targeted you personally and members of your prosecution team. Do you have a response to the former president now that this trial is concluded?
I do not.
Out in February, you decided not to bring a case against Donald Trump. You were criticized then. You were criticized when you indicted him in March 2023. You were criticized when people really started to understand that case. How do you think of all that now, seeing the results of that? Can you kind of put that in context with your personal history?
I did my job. Our job is to follow the facts and the law without fear or favor. And that's exactly what we did here. And what I feel is just gratitude to work alongside phenomenal public servants who do that each and every day in matters that you all write about and make the press, and in lots of matters that you don't. I did my job. We did our job. Many voices out there. The only voice that matters is the voice of the jury, and the jury has spoken.
Could I ask Mr. Steinglass, many people said the prosecution was masterful and flawless. Just want to know how you feel at this moment. Sorry.
I'll let you go ahead.
How do you feel?
Mr. Steinglass, I think some of you probably saw him speak for a little bit the other day. So he's done his job, as has this team. And he just told me, tell him how I feel. I think you said that. I will just say just enormous gratitude. You know, our system, I talked about the jurors at the beginning of my remarks. We have a phenomenal system. 12 everyday New Yorkers. They listen to the judge's directions. They follow the evidence. You saw them in court every day. They were careful and attentive. And so I feel deep gratitude to work alongside them, to be a part of this system. And I just want to echo that this is what we're doing every single day. I mean, during this trial, you know, just this week, right, a ghost gun indictment, Grimaldi's wage theft plea resolution, sex crimes, convictions, all sorts of work that's being done by phenomenal public servants. So we're before you today on this obviously consequential matter, but this is what we do every day. We follow the facts and the law without fear or favor.
If a jail sentence is in the cards, it is likely that Trump and his attorneys would seek a stay on enforcement of that sentence pending appeal. If that were the scenario, would your office object to staying the sentence?
I'm going to let our words in court speak for themselves when we get to the sentencing matter. I'm not going to address hypotheticals. They raise arguments, we'll respond. And I think your question really underscores an important point. This is an active, ongoing matter, right? We have other phases of this going ahead. We will continue to do our speaking about this matter, about issues like that in court.
All right, last one.
From day one, kind of the viability of this case has been questioned in all sorts of media outlets, all over the place, including from the defendant himself. Can you respond to any of that, how you feel now that you've gotten the conviction?
So my response, again, is I did my job. And I think particularly I talked about the history of the office. You know, my personal history, I started as a prosecutor in 2003 in the Public Integrity Unit in the New York State Attorney General's office. I served also in the Public Integrity Unit in the Southern District of New York. These are kind of cases I've done personally, and it's a hallmark of the tradition of this office that I'm proud to lead. And I don't want to go into the whole body of litigation, you know, but we now have a federal court decision ruling on the legal theories. We had a state court decision on the omnibus motions. But most importantly, today, we have the most important voice of all, and that's the voice of the jurors. They have spoken. Donald J. Trump has been convicted of 34 counts of falsifying business records. Thank you.
District Attorney, your office has been investigating this case since
Are you concerned about retribution if Trump is elected president?
That was District Attorney Alvin Bragg, who has been the focus of vitriol from Mr. Trump and most of his supporters for a long time. He was asked just now, do you want to say anything about that? No comment.
No comment whatsoever. And really talked at length, I think, today about how he and his office went about this case, saying that they did not treat this case any differently than any other case that they prosecute. And that was really at the forefront of their strategy with this incredibly historic, high-profile case. Until they actually got the indictments, he would not talk for more than a year about what they were doing with this case, because the person behind it before him, Cy Vance, district attorney, looked into it and didn't come out with any kind of indictments. He eventually did, but he wouldn't talk about it for that first year. And thanked the jury. He thanked the jury for their service. And really what was a very complicated case, and that they endured 5 hours of closing arguments on just the prosecution side, and really worked very hard, as we saw during the deliberations, of asking these questions, asking for readbacks from David Pecker, as well as Michael Cohen, and also the judge's instructions.
34 charges in less than 11 hours of deliberations. That's pretty quick.
Yeah. We should also say that while DA Alvin Bragg was speaking, we did also learn that Donald Trump will speak tomorrow at Trump Tower at 11 a.m., where we expect to have quite a fiery response to today's historic verdict.
What's he doing tonight?
He has a fundraiser.
There you go.
That we understand he will still be attending.
Yeah, that doesn't stop. By the way, we're also hearing from Stormy Daniels. Maybe you remember her and heard her, the woman who received the hush money payment at the center of this case.
Yes. In a statement, her lawyer says, quote, Stormy is relieved that this case is now over. She always had great faith in our justice system and in the solemn oath jurors take in undertaking their service. No man is above the law, and the selfless, hardworking service of each of these jurors should be respected and appreciated.
Former President Trump said this was just a phony baloney thing, and it was just a terrible thing that happened in America. And America is down the drain, is what he said today. We're asking people in our area as well, in Times Square, in fact, what they thought of this verdict. Eyewitness News reporter Kimberly Richardson is there with what people said on the street. Kim?
Bill and Liz, people had lots to say. One person said, quote, shocking but understandable. Another woman here with her family from the Chicago area, she told me she was, quote, giddy that she had just been over to Trump Tower, of course, the former president's prized residence, and she made a TikTok video. Take a look. This is some video shot here in Times Square right around the time when the verdict was handed down. Here in the crossroads of America, yes, for decades, on countless occasions, this is where millions have gathered to watch and follow some of the most monumental moments in history. And you can now add this one to the list. Word spread quickly here in Times Square once folks found out, yes, guilty on 34 felony counts. Well, one woman told me justice, that no one, not the average citizen all the way up to the Pope, is above the law. Take a listen to what some other folks had to say.
I can't believe it. I thought he was guilty, but I didn't think that that was really going to happen. I'm amazed. Thank God we have a jury system that holds nobody in favoritism, and that they worked diligently and came to the conclusion they did.
Are you surprised how fast they just got the case?
You know, I think from what I've been following, the prosecution did a really good job of laying out what everything was.
I'm not surprised. It seemed that the evidence that was presented all seemed to point in that direction, and there wasn't much of a defense placed against it. So it seems that everyone was just kind of in the same place at the same time.
Now, one man who I spoke to also said he's not so much worried about what this will do to Trump's base. He's rather concerned what, if any, role this decision will have in the upcoming presidential election. And just like that, here in Times Square, the verdict was announced. Everybody back to getting selfies with those characters and checking out all of us. For now, we're live in Times Square. Kimberly Richardson, Channel 7 Eyewitness News. Bill and Liz, back to you.
Life goes on, no question about it. Kim, thank you for that.
Yeah, also there was a lot of people camped out in front of Trump Tower in Midtown, and that is where Dan Krauth is, where we saw the former president walk into Trump Tower not too long ago.
So they say opposite. Yes, Liz, he's still here right now. He came up here right here behind me. They parked his motorcade right here outside the doors. He came to this corner, and that's where he waved to the crowd. He held up both fists. He mouthed thank you. Then he walked back inside. He has two eldest sons behind him. And then a short time later, he hit post on his social media account announcing a press conference right back here tomorrow at 11 a.m. Now, this is pretty remarkable if you think about it. This is where it all started for the former president. He was made here in New York. This is where he became a household name. He has lived here at this residence off Fifth Avenue for decades. He's been very proud of it. He's where he went down that escalator to announce his candidacy, and it's where he'll be laying his head tonight as a convicted felon. Of course, he today saying that it was a rigged verdict, and the real verdict will be taking place on November 5th, on Election Day. I'm looking at a few hundred people who are down here near the Trump Tower right now, and the crowd truly is mixed. A few minutes ago, people were chanting "Stop the Steal." Other people were also chanting "Lock him up" and getting applauses. But there are also a lot of tourists down here taking pictures, and a woman from Paris walked up to me and she said, "Excuse me, sir, what's going on here today?" And I said, "Well, the former president was just convicted on 34 felony counts." And she looked at me and said, "Ugh, America." Back to you guys in the studio.
Well, it sort of does reflect the division that's in this country, and it probably didn't change many minds one way or the other on this. I think people have made up their mind about who they're going to vote for come November. Certainly most Americans. Dan, thank you very much for that. Appreciate it. We want to return one more time to Josh Einiger, who was in the courtroom during sentencing.
Yeah, and we want to get Josh's final thoughts about today's historic verdict.
Well, Liz and Bill, it was just a remarkable afternoon in that drab courtroom on the 15th floor of the notoriously drab and worn-down Manhattan criminal court complex behind me. And in that courtroom was suddenly this incredible tension when it became clear that the jury was not going home, as the judge had said just a few minutes earlier, that in fact exactly the opposite was happening. They had sent a note saying they had reached a verdict, and then when they came in and it turned out the former president of the United States, a former president of the United States for the first time in history, is now convicted of a felony, and not just one, but 34 counts. The former president, Mr. Trump, his sentencing is set for July. He walked out of the courtroom looking furious, I guess is the best way to put it. Just a look of anger etched on his face as he stalked out of the courtroom, trailed by his legal team, as well as one of his sons, Eric, and a few other members of his entourage who've been here for much of the 6-week-long trial. Bill, Liz?
Itself, amazing post today, just now, a political prisoner. Of course, he's not a prisoner, right? And he's not expected to become a prisoner.
I don't think at the moment, he's obviously not a prisoner. He's at Trump Tower, and nothing really political about this. This is a court of law and a prosecution by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office and a jury of 12 New Yorkers, many who had advanced degrees, 2 of whom are attorneys, some of whom have, less of an education, all of whom came together and in, 10, 11 hours over 2 days, day and a half, decided he was guilty on all counts. So I think you're going to see a lot of tweeting or posting on Truth Social from the former president. You're going to see a lot of fundraising off of this. It's going to be a huge part of his political campaign, but this is, of course, not a part of the presidential election. This was a felony trial of which he was convicted.
Will it affect the presidential election?
Right.
That's the issue. All right.
And there's no doubt that we will probably start hearing some of what Donald Trump has to say at this fundraiser that he's expected to go to later this evening, and of course tomorrow morning when he stands in front of cameras once again outside of Trump Tower. Josh, thank you so much for all of your impeccable reporting today and your great insight from inside that courtroom.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. We'll see you at 11 o'clock
Thank you,
tonight
guys.
for Eyewitness News at 11. And stay with Eyewitness News and ABC News for the very latest on this big story. Former President Donald Trump convicted on all counts in his criminal hush money trial. Be sure to bring you any updates on air and online tonight. And then, of course, tonight
On Eyewitness News at 11. Until then, have a great night.
Bye-bye.